tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Both the US and China send warships through the region.
I'm Rick Lowett for TaiwanPlus, here at a grouper farm in southern Taiwan, where fish farmers are getting caught in the rising tensions between Taipei and Beijing.
Well, I think that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now.
Joe Biden pours cold water on a possible Taiwan visit by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And we take a look at how Taiwan fares on the global red list of endangered species. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Plus News. I'm Divya Gopalan. It is good to have your company. We begin with the latest on the tensions in the Taiwan Strait, with both the US and Chinese warships sailing through the region on Tuesday. Now, China sent its aircraft carrier, the Shandong, on the same day that the US sent its guided missile destroyer. That's the USS Benfold. The US regularly sends naval patrols through the Taiwan Strait to assert international law on freedom of navigation. But the patrols anger China, which views them as support for Taiwan. In a statement, Beijing says the transits demonstrate that the U.S. is a, quote, maker of security risks in the Taiwan Strait. So 30 tons of Taiwanese grouper are now destined for Japan after China abruptly halted imports of the fish. But the ban has rocked an industry forged from close Taiwan-China ties. Rick Lowett now takes a closer look at how geopolitics is taking its toll on Taiwan's trade.
These fishermen in southern Taiwan are sorting grouper. It takes 3 years for the fish to be ready for harvest. Last year, 91% of Taiwan's grouper for export went to China, sold and shipped live. Much of the country's grouper farms are in this region. But earlier this month, Beijing abruptly banned grouper imports from Taiwan, throwing the industry into turmoil.
因为我们这个生活都是靠这种养殖的啊，你这个饲料也在涨，什么什么东西都在涨，啊你这个成本越大，就让我们这养殖的人的经济的问题就提高嘛。
China claims there were banned chemicals and excessive levels of other drugs in the grouper from Taiwan. Taiwan says the ban is politically motivated and is considering filing a complaint with the World Trade Organization. But Taiwan also bans the import of more than 600 agricultural products from China, another point of friction in cross-strait trade. Fish farms like these flourished around 10 years ago when ties between Taiwan and China were warming and the two countries signed a free trade agreement. Now, with the relationship the frostiest it's been in decades, industries like this one are at the mercy of geopolitical tensions. China claims Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory, and aside from threatening invasion, it is also waging a war of attrition. This includes sending warplanes into the area around Taiwan, forcing the country's military to scramble jets in response. But many here feel Chinese aggression isn't limited to flexing its military hardware.
Taiwan and China, in terms of economic and trade relationships, are now into we're looking at a very bumpy future. There will be other agricultural products that are equally likely to be subject to this a sudden ban based on food safety rationales or reasons. So the symbolic impact is that the old good days are gone.
The grouper industry is not the first to find itself in a prickly situation because of deteriorating relations with China. A ban on Taiwanese pineapples last year prompted a freedom pineapple movement. Local consumers and overseas allies bought the fruit en masse to make up for the loss of the China trade. As Taiwan looks to lessen reliance on the Chinese market, food has become a hot topic for domestic politics. In 2020, opposition lawmakers threw pig intestines in the legislature to protest the plans to import US pork containing the controversial additive ractopamine. The ruling party advocated for imports in a hard-fought referendum last year, describing the ban as a sticking point in furthering trade talks with the US. Food imports from Fukushima, which suffered a nuclear disaster in 2011, also caused controversy. But again, the ruling party, at the risk of alienating voters, pushed for produce from Fukushima to be allowed in. It wanted Japan's support for Taiwan's bid to join a massive trans-Pacific trade bloc. Agricultural trade to China by volume is already down 10% in the first half of this year.
我们必须要分散这个市场，不要把鸡蛋同时放在同一个篮子里面。我们过去太依赖中国的单一市场，那当然有它的原因，有地缘之变的关系，所以我们大部分外销会走到中国市场。
But the fish farmers here in Yong'an, exporting to a new market is not that easy. 30 tons of grouper are now on the way to Japan, and the country has promised to buy more. But this means the fish farmers will have to process, package and freeze their products, a much more costly procedure than selling the fish live across the strait to China.
就我的感觉是无力感，也是很无奈啊，因为这种两岸的关系不是说我们三言两语就可以解决的，真的是凡事还是要靠政府去搞好这个整体经济啊。
For those in the fishing community in Taiwan's south, deteriorating relations across the strait are less about regional stability and geopolitics and more about everyday economics. Damon Lin and Rick Lowett for TaiwanPlus.
Well, China's agricultural bans have mostly hit farmers in areas that voted heavily for the president, Tsai Ing-wen. Her ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP, favors Taiwan's independence, while major opposition party, the Kuomintang or KMT, pushes for closer ties with China. To find out how Taiwanese politics may have shaped China's policy, Rick again spoke to Guanting Chen. He's the CEO of the think tank Taiwan Next Gen Foundation.
In what ways are Taiwanese people indirectly caught up in the country's geopolitics?
Taiwan is facing a geopolitical challenge, which is CCP, China. So we are facing difficulties not only on military threats, security challenge, but also on Chinese ban on agricultural imports. So Chinese ban on agricultural imports could potentially be seen as measures against the ruling party, since it is mostly southern DPP voting regions that lead in Taiwan's agricultural industry. China has not yet banned imports on, say, semiconductors, which are produced by northern areas that also have higher tendencies to vote for the KMT.
In what ways do you think domestic politics in Taiwan affects the Chinese Communist Party's policies, economic policies towards Taiwan?
So prior to 2016, the CCP was focusing on providing more benefits for the voters in southern part of Taiwan, so they could change their opinion to CCP or China. They will see Communist Party as an economic opportunity, as a place they can expand their market. So prior to 2016, we can see a lot of promotions on Taiwan's products selling to mainland China. But after 2016, after China obstruction started, we could see a huge shift of Chinese policy to Taiwan. So it was prior to 2016, she was trying to buy the hearts of Taiwanese farmer, but after that, it has become more coercive in a way.
U.S. President Joe Biden says his country's military is wary about a potential trip to Taiwan by the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi next month.
Mr. President, do you think it's a good idea for Speaker Pelosi to travel to Taiwan this summer?
Well, I think that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now, but I don't know what the status of it is.
Pelosi was originally scheduled to visit Taiwan in April, but she had to postpone after testing positive for COVID-19. The UK's Financial Times reported this week that she now plans to move forward with that trip in August. Pelosi would be the highest-ranking American lawmaker to visit Taiwan in a quarter of a century. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said it would take, quote, resolute and strong measures should the trip take place. Biden told reporters he expects to speak directly with China's President Xi Jinping in the coming days, but he held back further on details.
What talk to President Xi soon,
I think I'll be talking to President Xi within the next 10 days.
What will you tell him about tariffs?
I'll tell him to have a good day.
Taiwan has reached another milestone in its space technology ambitions. It has completed the construction of its second domestically made weather satellite. The Triton will be tasked with gathering ocean wind data that can help improve weather forecasts. Now, the satellite is set to be delivered to the launch site in French Guiana before the end of the year, and it could be launched into space by the first quarter of 2023. So, children in Taiwan aged 6 months to 5 years are now eligible to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. Moderna shots will be available at designated hospitals, clinics, and childcare centers. Appointments can be booked through each of the local government's health bureaus. And in another change to the country's vaccine policy, starting from Friday, 50-year-olds and above can get a second booster shot, so long as it's 5 months after their previous one. Now, the Global Biodiversity Authority is releasing updates to its so-called red list of the world's endangered species. The list from the International Union for Conservation of Nature is based on assessments by experts in the field. Risk of extinction is divided into 8 categories, and that includes species not immediately under threat, those in jeopardy, and those close to extinction. In Taiwan, 15 species are considered critically endangered, and these include mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and freshwater fish. Our reporter Yujing Huang spoke to Lin Rui Xiang, a researcher at the Endemic Species Research Institute, which oversees the red list here in Taiwan.
Taiwan renews this list every 5 years. Why 5? And how is it conducted?
We need some funding to conduct the assessment. And usually the population status of the species will not change very, very quick. So we think 5 years will be a suitable period of time to reassess the threatened status for the species in Taiwan. First, we need to define what kinds of tests will include in the list of for evaluation, and then we will collect all the data for every species in details and to conduct a preliminary assessment. And then we will adjust their category according to the national situation.
Do the list mean anything to conservation policy making?
For the red list, it's very important information to, for example, like to prioritize a recovery program and research. Also, it's very helpful to evaluate monitoring its adequacy or not. And it's also very important for gaining the support for the habitat protection and facilitating the resource allocation. After we published the several releases from 2016 to 2017, it becomes a very important reference for almost every the EIA, the environmental impact assessment, and other the many engineering if they have some public construction, and then need to consider the animal and plants that appear near their site, and the release is a very important reference for the species, and they need to check it very carefully. And it's also very important to reassess the protection list according to the wildlife the conservation laws.
Now, with the Chinese Communist Party Congress coming up in November, it's a sensitive time in the country's political calendar. In recent months, strict COVID measures have dampened Chinese growth. But as James Chater reports, another crisis at the heart of China's economy is gaining pace.
frustrations with the foundations of China's economy boiling over. Beneath a poster of Chairman Mao, the father of communist China, residents of Zhengzhou in Henan province earlier this month railing against the region's authorities. Their demands: access to deposits and life savings, frozen, local banks said, while they, quote, upgraded internal systems. The protests come as China's economy stalls, stricken by months of COVID-0 lockdowns. China's economy expanded just 0.4% year-on-year in the second quarter of 2022, the lowest figure since the emergence of COVID paralysed the country in early 2020. Skeletal structures like these are a sign of that paralysis. Property has driven economic growth in China and is where 70% of household wealth is stored. But across the country, with developers strapped for cash, construction has stopped.
The Chinese government has, for many years, been trying to reduce the role that the property sector plays in fueling Chinese growth. And the reason is really quite simple. They simply want to have a more diversified economy.
But caught in the middle, thousands of people waiting for unfinished properties, now sending letters to local banks and developers threatening to withhold mortgage payments if construction doesn't restart.
This is a fairly unprecedented move. We haven't seen anything quite like this in the property sector, at least to this level, where all of these open letters are coming from across various provinces, hundreds of affected projects.
We Need Home is an open source site that's collating these letters from disgruntled citizens. This audio file posted to the site is purportedly of a Henan woman complaining to her developer.
我们所有的钱都交了这个房贷了，我们分期买了一个房子，就是我们也不敢保证我们死之前能不能还完，以后孩子还得再还，这一个房子联系到我们3代人呀。
In China, these unfinished homes are seen as a symbol of evaporating prosperity. And there are fears such growing dissatisfaction could lead to more scenes like those in Zhengzhou.
And you often find within families, people pull their resources together to buy property. So if the value of property goes down, it has a big impact on their overall wealth and feeling of well-being.
For China's rulers, collective social action is unwelcome, especially before a Communist Party Congress. The November gathering is expected to give Xi Jinping a norm-busting third term as president, and he will have to balance what the party sees as necessary economic reforms and the discontent they produce. Alex Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
And for more on China's mortgage crisis, our reporter James Chater spoke to Rebecca Chong Wilkins, an Asia politics and government correspondent for Bloomberg in Hong Kong.
China's property crisis is an ongoing story, and there have been many tense moments in the past year. Why has this story come to a head once again now?
Well, for the first time, we're really seeing a broad expression of discontent from ordinary Chinese people. We're seeing more and more people deciding to boycott mortgage payments on homes that they've paid for, but that haven't been delivered yet. And all of the results are really because of this sweeping crackdown Beijing has embarked on across the property sector that has led to many leading developers defaulting. So Beijing first started cracking down on the real estate sector in late 2020. Essentially moving to try and curb risk among what are some of the most debt-saddled borrowers in the system, but also to try and bring down home prices to make homes more affordable under the common prosperity agenda.
How has Beijing responded to this collective action of mortgage holders, and what impact have those measures had?
So we have seen one potential proposal to offer essentially many of these boycotters a mortgage holiday where they would be able to stop temporarily paying mortgages on homes that haven't yet been delivered without incurring any kind of penalty to their credit score. The concern, I think, though, is that although this might ease frustrations in the short term, this type of offering of a reprieve might actually encourage other types of sort of copycat protests or copycat boycotts across China.
And could the effects of an escalation of this property crisis impact economies outside of China?
So at the moment, the risks look relatively well ring-fenced. The disruption that we've seen initially in financial markets has pared back a little bit. There were, of course, some concerns that we could see a crisis akin to the scale of Lehman at one point. That was sort of proffered. But I think more broadly, authorities have really snapped into action very, very quickly to try and curb any risk spilling over.
India is getting a new president. It's a largely ceremonial role picked by members of parliament, and the strong favourite is the ruling BJP's pick, Draupadi Murmu. If she is elected, it would be a milestone in the country's history, as Louise Watt reports.
The expected next president of India, and the first from the country's tribal community. Draupadi Murmu was put forward by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party, which projected the veteran politician as a leader representing poor tribal communities. It's a largely ceremonial role, but the president can be instrumental when general elections are inconclusive, deciding which party should form a government. More than 4,500 national and regional lawmakers cast their votes for the president on Monday. Weeks before the vote, Modi tweeted that Murmu devoted her life to serving society and empowering the poor, downtrodden, as well as the marginalised. Some political observers see it as a canny move, designed to win Modi's party more supporters from communities that feel forgotten by India's leaders. But others say her election will make a difference.
This is seen as a very welcome step because for a very, very long time, tribals and tribal leaders have been ignored. They are only looked as people who are occupying at the lower strata.
People from tribal communities make up around 9% of India's population, or just over 100 million. They often face discrimination and are among India's poorest communities. Many of them will be hoping that a Murmu presidency will mean that they too will get more attention. Patrick Chen and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
And across the water, Sri Lanka's parliament has chosen the former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe to lead the country. He will take over as interim president until a popular vote in 2024. Protests have reignited, with many accusing him of being too close to the previous regime. Sri Lanka is on the brink of economic collapse. Essentials such as fuel and medical supplies are running out as the government is struggling to pay its debts and bring in sufficient imports. Well, for more on the new president, our reporter Bing Wang spoke with Ambika Satkunanathan. She's a human rights activist based in Colombo.
What do you expect the new president to do for Sri Lanka, and are the people of Sri Lanka happy about the new choice?
The president, or the new president, was actually not chosen by the people. According to the constitution, he was selected by parliament to complete the remainder of the term of the previous president. And he is not the person who the people wanted. Mr. Wickremesinghe is seen as an extension of the Rajapaksas, as his proxy, someone who protected the Rajapaksa during the previous good governance government when he was the prime minister, and will continue to protect the Rajapaksas in the future.
Can you explain all the factors that the country's economy has collapsed like this?
We've had, the twin deficits. Our income has not been enough to meet our national expenditure. We have unsustainable debt. We have got into debt for vanity infrastructure projects like the tallest tower in Asia, like the Hambantota port, the Hambantota airport. And this has led to a foreign exchange crisis, which means that we have not been able to import fuel. We've not been able to import gas. And when you have a fuel shortage, that means the country comes to a standstill. Schools can't function, offices can't function, the economy can't function, daily wage earners are badly affected. We can't, farmers cannot transport their vegetables from even district to district. And when people's livelihood, daily livelihood is adversely impacted, it means they cannot access even simple things like food. The people have cut down from 3 meals even to 1 meal.
What do you think the country can do to revive itself from the crisis?
The pressure that needs to be put on these people is to go for quick general elections, because that is how we will have political stability. That is how you restore people's faith in the democratic process, in parliament, and that is what we need to push for. And of course, the IMF negotiations do need to continue, because we do need, as I said, and as I described before, we are at really crisis point and people are suffering, and we do need that, and we need the international community's support.
Taiwan's passport has dropped slightly in the rankings for the world's most powerful travel documents. Now, according to an annual report, Taiwan ranks 34th this year, granting visa-free access to 145 destinations. It dropped 1 notch from last year. Now, Japan currently has the most powerful passport in the world. It offers entry to 192 countries or territories. And the most difficult passport to travel with is Afghanistan's, with only 27 countries accepting it for visa-free travel. And finally, we'll be leaving you with these images of the seashore in Gaza, where surfers are enjoying the waves. For more stories on Taiwan from Taiwan and around the world, a reminder, you can always download the TaiwanPlus app. Thank you for watching from me and the TaiwanPlus team.